Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves for a new 20th Century Review starring our host with the mustache, Henry Mockingbird!
Hello, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache. And it's been a hot minute since the last time I reviewed an Alice in Wonderland adaptation, now hasn't it? Well, I'm going to make up for lost time by reviewing the 1949 Alice in Wonderland.
At Oxford, Mr. Dodson, a.k.a. Lewis Carroll, tells a story to Alice in which Alice falls asleep during. In her dreams, she sees a white rabbit with a trench coat and a monocle. She ends up following the rabbit and going down the rabbit hole, and you guessed it, she lands in Wonderland and has many misadventures in Wonderland. Well, I like it, although I have to ask, what in all hell is up with this poster? Seriously, this looks like the cover of a Playboy magazine some weirdo would be turned on by. The film was directed by Dallas Bauer, who's pretty much known for this and nothing else. Apparently, Walt Disney himself tried to sue the pants off of Dallas Bauer for making his film around the time Disney was making his, despite the fact that the story of Alice in Wonderland is in the public domain, meaning that anyone can make their own version of the story.
Hey, it could have been worse. I mean, Alice in Wonderland could have belonged to Disney for several years. And if it came out of the public domain today, we would have gotten something along the lines of that crappy Winnie the Pooh horror movie.
Disney also sued him to prevent the British release of the film in America. The whole case was covered by Time magazine. And if that wasn't enough, this film wasn't even allowed to be released in the UK. Mostly because of its representation of the Queen of Hearts, which they thought was very unkind to Queen Victoria. And this film wasn't even allowed to be released in the UK until 1985. And when it finally got something resembling a release, what very little critic reviews it got were mostly negative, with Leonard Maltin giving it 2 stars, saying that the film lacked charm and wit. Yeah, weren't you the same guy who liked Godzilla's Revenge? And while the Disney version gained a cult following due to constant airings on television, this film would only fade into the darkness of obscurity. While it did get a TV airing on the BBC, in America it wasn't so lucky. Hell, you would be more lucky to find the 1933 film airing on television. The only thing that this film got was a couple of VHS releases in 1992. This film would end up being saved in 2009 by the Museum of Modern Art, which showed a never-before-seen version of the film. And in 2016, it ended up getting a DVD release by American Pop Classics. The film starts with Mr. Dodson and Alice and her sisters taking a photograph. Mr. Dodson is basically this movie's equivalent to Lewis Carroll, even though he looks nothing like the real-life Lewis Carroll. Alice in this version is played by British actress Carol Marsh, who's probably best remembered for playing Fan in the 1951 Christmas Carol and Lucy from Horror of Dracula starring Christopher Lee. Here's a fun fact for you. Carol Marsh was only 20 years old when she played Alice, even though Alice is supposed to be 7 years old. Although Charlotte Henry was 19 years old when she played Alice, so I guess having Carol Marsh be a 20-year-old playing a 7-year-old isn't too much of a stretch. The movie does have a couple of similarities with The Wizard of Oz, in that it opens in the real world, and we have the real world counterparts and the fantasy counterparts, like the Queen of England, who looks very similar to the actual Queen of Hearts in Alice's Dream. I can't imagine how the UK found this version of the Queen of Hearts unkind to Queen Victoria. The version of Alice is supposed to be like the real-life Alice, even though she looks nothing like the real-life version of Alice, and doesn't even have the same hair, and is not even the same age. The version of Alice is very similar to the real-life version of Alice in that she has sisters. The film actually begins with Alice in her dream, and she sees the White Rabbit. And you pretty much know the drill from here. The rabbit fears that he's going to be late and runs off to his hole. And Alice follows him to the hole. Even though this hole looks nothing like a rabbit hole, it looks more like a cave. Here's another fun fact for you. Carol Marsh tended to do a lot of her own stunts. That brings me to the sets, which all look pretty damn good. I mean, seriously, this looks like something out of a Tim Burton movie. Most of these sets could be sets for Beetlejuice. And really think about this. How sad is it that this version feels more like a Tim Burton version of Alice in Wonderland than the actual Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland? Brings me to the next thing, which is equally worthy of praise, the stop motion, which was done by stop motion pioneer Louis Bunyan, who's worked on films like the Ziegfeld Follies, who's also made his own stop-motion shorts as well as worked on television, and also worked with another obscure comedian, Charlie Bauer. Stop motion moves rather fluently and rather smooth, especially for 1949 standards. Keep this in mind. This film came out several decades before The Nightmare Before Christmas, which has some of the best stop motion you will ever see. And a whole decade before Rankin Bass's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And while I do have a fondness for Rankin Bass's work, a lot of their early work in stop motion tended to be on the clunky side. Stark contrast to this film, which none of its characters ever move clunky. In fact, I dare say a lot of the stop motion in this film is almost on par with some of the work that Henry Selick would do later on, with stuff like Coraline. With all that said, let's go back to Alice in Wonderland. When we last left off Alice, she locks herself in a room full of doors. She tries to get out of the room by trying to unlock the doors, only for something strange to start happening. And I especially love the look Alice gives here. Like, seriously, what kind of look is that? All the doors start disappearing around her until there's one door left and it shrinks. And a key appears from out of nowhere on the table, and luckily she is able to unlock the door using that key. And then the drink me bottle Tim Burton's itself onto the table, and she drinks it down, only for her to shrink to a very small size. Next up, we have the Eat Me treat, which looks very similar to a Reese's cup, if that Reese's cup had the ability to make you really, really big. Feeling rather frustrated, Alice cries an ocean full. Her to nearly drown in a puddle of her own tears, quite literally. Starts swimming in the tear-filled ocean and comes across the drink me bottle as well as a mouse. And this is where we get the introduction to one of the film's very first songs. Yes, this movie is a musical and has a lot of songs, but most of them are pretty damn forgettable in my book. And I gotta say, the way the stop motion and live action are integrated are rather well. So, with all that said, let's listen to the song. This is Carol Marsh singing I'm Upside Down, I'm Downside Up.
Everything is getting curiouser and curiouser, and it's not the way I planned. Adventures all around me delight me and astound me in this topsy-turvy land. Curiouser and curiouser, I'm upside down, I'm downside up. It started early today. I felt like dancing on the ceiling, and I've a feeling I may. I'm upside down,
Next up is the Duchess scene, where Alice goes into the Duchess' house. We get to meet the Duchess, and we meet the Duchess maid a virtue of her throwing everything but the kitchen sink. I mean, really, she's throwing pots and pans all over the doggone place. She even throws red pepper on the screen. Like, was this supposed to be in 3D? Never mind. Anyways, Alice comes in. And this is where we get our first look at the Cheshire Cat who's hanging about in the kitchen. And the Duchess gets her invitation from the Queen to play croquet. And then we get to see the Duchess's baby be turned into a pig. And Alice pretty much remarks to herself with, "It would have grown up to be an ugly child, but it makes a lovely pig." See the Cheshire Cat sitting on the tree. And Alice and her pretty much have a chit-chat with each other. And next up is the famous Mad Hatter Tea Party scene. I really like these guys. They're not as mad as other iterations of the March Hare and the Mad Hatter, but they're loony enough. This movie takes a page right out of the 1978 Pinocchio and takes a scene that is very rarely used in other adaptations. In this case being Alice's encounter with the giant dog. I mean, this thing looks adorable. And Alice gets to play fetch with him, using what looks like a giant pole in which she throws. When I said that a lot of the songs in this movie came across as forgettable to me, well, that's not entirely true. As stated earlier, I do like the song "I'm Upside Down, I'm Downside Up," and there's another song I find really damn catchy. And a couple of songs are very catchy. They just don't stick with me. This song, which is called Game, which is sung by the White Rabbit. Let's listen to it, shall we?
I was the very least of the very largest litter of the very poorest family in the wood. My troubles never ceased, and my life was very bitter, till I learned the knack of grabbing what I could. He followed all the rules, all right, all wrong. The rules I make up as I go along. I play it politely, all the room and nightly. If it passes by on chances, I play the game. I heard a woman say, "Day is night." I thought, what an awful dunce. To say that day is night is silly. I'll tell her so at once. But when I saw that the woman was the queen, the case was not the same. But she said it once again. Yes. And I cried, "Your Majesty." Yes. I absolutely agree with you. That's one thing the game. What does it get us? Step by step I gain my ends, standing only on my friends. Loyal till I'm bought, to both sides till I'm caught.
Well, I really do like this movie. It's very charming and witty. And if you're a fan of obscure media, I recommend you check this film out. It's on YouTube and the Internet Archive. Sadly, it's not gotten an HD release. but hopefully this review will give it some awareness to give us an HD release. I give this hidden gem 5 gold stars.
Until the next review, I'm Henry R. Mockingbird, your host with the mustache, signing off.
Check out my other shows, Modern Classics, TV Treasures,